I'm constantly hearing stories from fellow fabricators about that moment when a cheap, secondhand slag remover finally gives out, leaving a fresh cut edge covered in stubborn weld spatter, and a shop schedule suddenly in limbo. The regret is real, especially when you've already booked a job that can't wait for a hand scrub cleanup. So before I even pulled the plug on my old brush-type unit, I started digging into whether a purpose-built machine like the US stock 2300W Slat cleaner could actually be the smarter buy instead of another budget price disappointment. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What makes this kind of equipment different from the low-cost alternatives is the way it handles the physics of slag removal. The cheap models rely on LORP brushes or simple air knives, which often just push the slag around the edge instead of actually separating it from the metal. The US stock unit, by contrast, runs a 2300W all-copper motor that drives a high-torque cutting table. In real-world shop tests, that extra torque translates into a more consistent, even force across the entire slat, pulling the molten metal residue away in one smooth pass. That's the kind of reliability you notice when you're trying to finish a batch of 3mm steel panels for a client and can't afford to waste time recleaning each piece. If you're the type of fabricator who runs a CNC plasma cutter daily, you'll recognize how quickly slag builds up on the fence and on the cut edge. The slat you see after a cut is often a thin ribbon of solidified metal that, if left, can cause the next cut to snag, or even damage the torch nozzle. In a shop where you're cranking out dozens of parts per shift, that small inconvenience becomes a major bottleneck. The 2300W cleaner's enhanced cleaning efficiency isn't just marketing fluff, it's the result of a motor that can sustain enough power to keep the cutting table moving at a speed that matches most production lines. I've watched it take a 4mm thick sheet, run it through the cleaner, and emerge with a clean edge ready for inspection in under 10 seconds. That's the kind of throughput that makes a difference when you're tracking labor hours. On the flip side, the machine isn't a magic wand for anyone. If you're a hobbyist with a single-piece plasma cutter in a garage, the footprint and power requirements will probably outweigh the benefits. The unit is built with high-strength alloy steel components, which means it weighs close to a half-ton and sits on a fairly large base. You'll need a solid floor and a reliable power source. Most reviewers note that the motor runs best on 3-phase electricity, though it can be wired to single-phase with a proper converter. For a small shop that only does occasional cuts, the initial capital outlay and the space it consumes could feel like overkill. One of the things that surprised me while looking into this product was how low the ongoing maintenance actually is. The specs call out a cost-effective and low-maintenance design, and that's backed up by the choice of materials. The all-copper motor is resistant to overheating, and the alloy steel frame doesn't flex under repeated loads, which means you won't be swapping out worn-out parts every few months. In practice, that translates to a simple routine, a quick wipe-down after each shift, a monthly check of the motor's brushes, and you're good to go. Compare that to a cheap brush system that needs new bristles every couple of weeks, and the lifetime cost starts to tilt heavily in favor of the more expensive unit. Safety is another practical angle that often gets glossed over in generic reviews. The US stock cleaner has a minimal exposure design, so the moving parts are largely enclosed. The control panel is positioned away from the cutting table, reducing the chance of accidental contact. In a busy shop, that kind of thoughtful layout can prevent small injuries that add up to lost work time. I saw a video of a technician loading a slat without having to reach over any live gears, a small detail, but it matters when you have new apprentices on the floor. Now, let's talk about who should actually consider adding this machine to their workflow. If you're a medium-sized metal fabrication shop that runs a CNC plasma cutter at least 30 hours a week, the US stock 2300W can shave off enough manual labor to pay for itself within a few months. It's especially useful for industries that need clean edges for welding or painting. Automotive repair, HVAC ductwork, and custom signage all benefit from a consistently slag-free finish. The wide-ranging applications claim isn't just hype. You can feed stainless steel, carbon steel, even aluminum slats through the same unit without adjusting anything beyond the feed rate. On the other hand, if your operation is primarily low-volume prototyping, or if you already have a reliable manual cleaning process that fits within your schedule, you might want to skip this. The machine's power consumption is notable. At full load, the 2300W motor will add a measurable bump to your